Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Know Better, Do Better. I'm your host, Ray Leonard Jr. I want to thank you all for joining in, but first I want to give my heartfelt condolences to the families in Texas at Uvalde Elementary School. It's so sad that we have to have this conversation over and over again. We just had another mass killing in Buffalo at the grocery store there. And then now we have another situation of a mass shooting of little kids. And my heart breaks to continue to hear this. We want to talk about things that are good and positive and help people move forward in life, but we always seem to have to come back to this. So I want to say from the bottom of my heart that we need to actually do something. You have a lot of people that talk about thoughts and prayers. But at the end of the day, if we don't have any action, then nothing is going to change. So this is my plea to everybody out there. Do what you can, whether it's being an activist, whether it's actively talking to kids, going to schools, going to your congressman and making a change, making sure you're out there voting for people that are actually going to do something in Congress. So that's my plea today. And my guest today is a former athlete. He's an activist. He's a father. He's the personification of what you talk about the activist athlete is. He had over 11-year NBA career, phenomenal college career. But what's even more important is what he's done, after his NBA and athletic career. Everybody knows about the shut up and dribble conversation, but this is one man that refused to shut up and dribble. He's done, so much for the world and for his community. And I'm so happy to have him on today, Mr. Etan Thomas. Welcome to the show, sir.
How are you doing, sir? It's an honor to be on with you.
Good. And, in light of everything that we've seen, what's happening around the world, I want to talk to you about, your upbringing, where you came from, your athletic career, but more importantly, we want to talk today about, why you became an activist, why you're a writer, why you stand up and actually do something, are actively into the community, trying to make a difference. But to start off with, I know you were born in Harlem, New York.
Yes.
And then moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there's there's a big history in Tulsa, Oklahoma, obviously.
Definitely.
But what was that like, you as a young Etan Thomas, to say, okay, here, came from New York, I'm in Tulsa, and I'm a black man in Oklahoma, and I have to, figure out what my dreams and aspirations are going to be?
Well, one of the things that I learned very quickly is that there's two different Americas. I talked about, I just wrote a new book called Police Brutality and White Supremacy, The Fight Against American Traditions. And I started off with two specific instances when I was growing up where my eyes became open that there was two different Americas happening. I started off with the Rodney King incident and the Central Park 5 incident, now the Exonerated 5. So I was actually in Harlem. I spent all my summers in Harlem. So I was actually in Harlem when all that happened. I was recalling when I was in middle school when Rodney King happened. And that really opened my eyes to everything. Then I started really questioning things and asking my mom a million questions. And she just started feeding me different books. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which honestly changed my entire life. And she started giving me books about athletes who use their positions and platforms to be able to speak out on the injustices that they saw. So I started reading about Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And so I was just, I was amazed by it. And I was like, okay, that's the kind of athlete that I want to become. And so that's what kind of started that. And then I just kind of went on. And as I got older and kept playing more and more, I just continued it. But I had a bigger and bigger platform because I was playing more and more. So that's how it started with me.
Wow. So your mother was an educator. And
yes,
so I know you became a tall athlete. At what age did you figure out, okay, I can play basketball, I can be an athlete and use that to broaden my reach?
Well, I started, really playing and started speaking and doing things in middle school. Like right after I read Malcolm X, I was in the speech and debate team. I'm talking about different things, performing, reading Malcolm X's speeches at different tournaments and things of that nature. But it was really in high school where I really saw my voice. We had a situation where I was stopped by the police on my way to a basketball game. And they kept me for like 45 minutes, thought that they recognized me from a mugshot, had me on the ground, searching everything, real dramatic situation. And then afterwards, they figured out that, once they saw my Booker T. Washington high school bag, that they really knew me because I played basketball. And, so that I wrote about that situation. I wrote a speech about it, and I started performing it everywhere in Tulsa. Then I started winning a lot and performing it nationally. I took that speech all the way to Harvard. And a lot of people were saying, hey, thanks for doing this. Thanks for talking about this. Because, they'll listen to you. They won't listen to us, but they'll listen to you saying it. So, the media started covering it. The newspapers started covering it. And that was kind of like the aha moment. I was like, oh, so they're going to listen to me just because I can play basketball. I'm going to keep doing it. So that was kind of the light bulb moment for me.
Right. So how was that you ended up at Syracuse after being, an outspoken athlete? A lot of coaches would not want to have someone, especially as early on as you started becoming an activist and speaking out, to say, here, I want to give you opportunity to showcase your skills.
So I didn't have a lot of pushback. Coach Boeheim, he knew all about, my activism, knew about the, because it was written and talked about and covered so much. So he knew about the speech and debate, and he admired it. I remember the first time that I was, it was like the first week that I was on campus at Syracuse. I was a part of this big demonstration because the Black and brown students there were demonstrating the campus security having pepper spray and having the use of pepper spray, because the fear was that they were going to use the pepper spray on all of us. You know what I mean? Right. If you remember the movie Higher Learning, they treat the white parties one way, but treat us the other. So that was the fear. So I'm standing there right next to a big football player, Roland Williams. He ended up going on to win Super Bowls, and the Syracuse paper, the Daily Orange, took a picture, and it's both of us standing there in this big crowd of people. And so, that was on the cover. Basketball player and football player, kind of leading. It said leading the march, but we weren't leading it. We were just a part of it. So Coach Boeheim called me in his office. He was like, "Hey, I see you got right to doing what you did in high school right here. And listen," and he said, "Listen, I'll never be anyone that tries to silence you or tell you not to speak out, not to use your voice." He's like, "But one thing I will tell you, and I'll offer this tidbit to you, this piece of advice." He said, "If you do take a position, be prepared to defend it, because media is going to come after you and challenge you." And that was really a great piece of advice that I had at a very young age, but I never really got any pushback from him. So maybe it was just, maybe at other universities it's like that, but I didn't experience that.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, especially, up in northern New York, where it's a little different up there. It's cold.
It's not different. It's not different.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's shout out to Coach Boeheim for giving you that opportunity to say here, speak up. So how did that go for transitioning from collegiate basketball into professional sports? Went and played for my Wizards, but transitioning into professional sports, and I know they always have interviews and everything before you go into when you get in the draft. Was that a conversation that teams had with you about your activism, or that didn't come up at all?
People were complimentary about it, to be honest with you. And then when I was here with the Wizards, I remember, it was right when the invasion of Iraq happened. And so I'm looking at everything, and I'm like, and it was right after 9/11, just to be able to set the scene. Because now if you talk about Iraq, everybody, Republicans, Democrats, would be like, "Oh, no, we shouldn't have gone in there." But back then, it was right after 9/11. George W. Bush was like, either you're with us or you're against us. It was and I'm looking at it, I'm like, but wait a minute, what does Iraq have to do with 9/11? Did any connection? And I didn't see it. And it was one instance in particular. I'll never forget, I was at BWI Airport, and I saw all of these young people. They had to be like 17, 18, 19-year-olds going to, and I asked them, they're all in their fatigues in the airport. And I was like, where's everybody going? And they were like, "We're going to Iraq." And they looked so scared. They looked like some little kids. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't right." So then I was like, so, okay, now I started writing, questioning why we're going into Iraq, being against the invasion. And I started doing it all over DC. So, it was funny because late Abe Poland, who, passed away, but he was the governor of the Wizards at the time, you know, he called me to his office one day, and I was like, this is kind of odd because he doesn't call people in his office. So I walk in his office, and he has this big smile on his face. As soon as I come up there, he was like, "Hey, my son was at this big rally that you spoke at, and he was raving about you, and I think it's great." And we had this amazing conversation for like an hour about politics, about the gentrification that was going on in DC, about what affordable housing, all this different stuff. So I say all that to say, I don't know how it was in other organizations, but the organization that I was with, I didn't get the pushback. I got support. So, and I talk about that also in my book a lot, because the thought is that they're going to tell you to, if you do speak out, you're going to get punished. Like I heard that a lot from other people, the worry of it. Like, don't get done like Craig Hodges. Remember how Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf got done? Don't go there. You know what I mean? So be careful. But no, it's a different climate, and it's a different NBA now. So I'm thankful for that.
That's interesting that you say that, because like you talked about Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, you talk about Craig Hodges, you talk about some of the others that were outspoken, that had some different experiences. But normally if you're an athlete that's doing really well, then you have a lot more leeway. But when you were with the Wizards, you had some ups and downs. You even had heart surgery at the point. So how were they supportive during that time, or the organization?
Yeah. No, the Wizards was definitely supportive. Like I have no complaints. I mean, and talking about Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf and Craig Hodges, it was a different NBA at that time period, and it was a different commissioner. So Adam Silver is a lot different than David Stern was, and David Stern, he was like, I don't know, he wanted nothing to happen that was going to take away from the bottom line. The bottom line was season ticket holders, expansion, being able to grow the league, and anything that he thought would take away from it, he would squash it. So that's the reason why he was so much against anything, no matter what it was. That's the reason why he put in the dress code. And I was on the union that time, so I'm fighting against it. I'm like, wait a minute, you want us to dress nicer so we don't, scare white people and make them not want to come to the games? Is that what it is? But it was business. It was all bottom line. He doesn't want anything to take away from that. Now, I fundamentally disagree with that, but I understand where he was coming from. Fast forward to Adam Silver. He is embracing the culture. I interviewed Adam Silver in my book, We Matter, Athletes and Activism. And I asked him these very things. I said, would you punish an athlete for having an opinion, for speaking out on opinion that you disagree with? That's always the caveat. Anybody can applaud somebody that they agree with, but that you disagree with. And he said, no, I never would. I mean, I appreciate the athlete voice. And he talks about Bill Russell, talk about Kareem, and talk about athletes in the past. And I really wanted to do that because I wanted to use really this book to my previous book, We Matter, to be able to encourage the younger athletes to keep using their voices, because I see the power in it. I mean, especially now they have social media. Can you imagine if like Muhammad Ali had a Twitter account and had an Instagram? He could just say whatever he wants to anytime he wants to. I was like, y'all got power. Y'all don't have to go to no reporter to try to get them to understand your story and then present you in the right way. Y'all could do it yourselves. So that's just power. That's just power.
Now you said Ali had a Twitter account. That would have been a whole nother world. Ali was definitely not one to hold his tongue at all. He was so principled. And when you talk about someone that can defend your point of view, like that, that's exactly where he was. And so I love hearing that and seeing that Jim Boeheim talked to you about defending your point of views and being able to back it up. So that makes all the difference in the world. So when you wrote We Matter, like what was that to say? Okay, here I'm transitioning out of the NBA, or during the NBA, and I can write something that's going to make a difference. Was it something you saw, or you just wanted to really address the injustice and what was going on with athletes?
Well, it was. See, I was always on different panels and different discussions, and they would always, try to pit me against the current athletes. They would say, "Okay, you use your voice, you do all this. What's wrong with the athletes now? Why are they so quiet?" And I would always say, no, athletes have a lot of voices. We have a lot of discussions. They have a lot of opinions and things like that. A lot of times y'all don't hear about it, but they do. And nobody would ever believe me when I would say that. They would always like, "Oh, get out of here!" Like, no, I'm serious. So then, when Kaepernick took a knee, then you saw this explosion of activism happen, and it was beautiful. And I wanted to just capture it. So I actually interviewed Eric Reed, who was kneeling with Kaepernick the entire time. And I interviewed athletes from the past. I got to interview some of the athletes that I grew up admiring, like Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf and Craig Hott. That was amazing. I interviewed John Carlos, and I was telling him, I was like, I grew up with your picture on my wall.
This right here, right?
It's in my office right now where I'm sitting at. You know what I mean? So it was like amazing. But then I interviewed the current wave of athletes, like I interviewed, D Wade and Carmelo, and you know what I mean, all the different athletes now who are using their voices, and I wanted to capture why they were using their voices, why they didn't feel any fear, why they were, and really encourage younger athletes to follow suit and continue using their voice. So, that's, and also I interviewed family members of victims of police brutality, and they talked about how important and how meaningful it was for athletes to use their voices on behalf of their lost loved one. So I interviewed like Trayvon Martin's brother, Eric Garner's daughter. So all Philando Castile's mother. So all of these different people, so it can really bring it, to the center of attention of what it really was all about. Because if you remember at that time, a lot of people were kind of changing the message of why Kaepernick was taking a knee. And they were making about all these other things. And I was like, no. Let's bring it back to what it was. What he specifically said it was, which was these people who are having their lives taken away from them, being killed in the streets, all the things that he said by police officers, and the police officers not being held accountable for it. So I interviewed their family members, so that was, it was a powerful book.
Oh man, I love it. So we're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna come back. I want to talk about your new book. I want to talk about the activism on police brutality, and a little bit more about Kaepernick and that whole phase. This is Know Better, Do Better. I'm Ray Leonard Jr. We'll be right back.
The Black-owned Institute is where we teach children and educators that Black history is American history. Did you know the first person to stand on top of the world at the North Pole was a Black man?
Matthew Henson reached the geographic North Pole in April 6, 1909.
Did you know the first Black doctor treated patients in the 1800s in New York City?
James McCune Smith, first Black man to become a doctor of medicine in the United States in 1837.
Did you know one of the quotes in every U.S. passport is a quote from a Black woman educator from the 1920s?
The cause of freedom is not the cause of a race or sect, a party or a class. It is the cause of humankind, the very birthright of humanity.
Anna Julia Cooper, one of the first Black women to earn a PhD in 1925.
The Black-owned Institute exposes the hidden figures who made unforgettable contributions to the United States, yet are not featured in our history books. Starting in kindergarten, children will learn about Black and African history. They'll gain a more complete picture of the role Black Americans played and continue to play in making our country great. Become a part of this historic movement. Join the Institute. BlackOwnedInstitute.com.
Hey, welcome back to Know Better, Do Better. I'm your host, Ray Leonard Jr., and I'm here with my prestigious guest, Etan Thomas. Before we left, we were talking about Colin Kaepernick and the change of the narrative of why he took a knee. So you got a chance to interview him, right?
No. I didn't interview him. He wasn't. I spoke to him, but he wasn't talking at that time. He was kind of being a little bit quiet. So he's the one that actually introduced me to his teammate Eric Reed, who was kneeling with him. So
So Eric, so when that conversation came out and it was such a big blowback of him taking a knee. Like, athletes have had conversations, have done things to express themselves. Why do you think that was such a big issue with him taking a knee?
Well, so it's interesting. I talked to Kareem about this in the book, and he said the reason why you saw so much pushback and so much blowback from it, and you had, President Trump at the time, attacking him, and so many people saying that, they wanted to be so dedicated to distorting his message, and then also making him look like he doesn't know what he's talking about. All those different tactics, the same that they do to LeBron. So Kareem talked a lot about LeBron, and so they do. And Kareem said because they fear the power that they have. He was like, just think about it. Trump wouldn't address someone that didn't have any power and that wasn't a threat to them. They are a threat to them. So first of all, they should take it as a compliment that you're so much as a threat to them that Fox News has to dedicate segments to you, that Trump is up there in rallies trying to discredit you. That tells you that what you're doing is having an impact. And I thought that was so profound, and you wouldn't expect anything less but something profound from Kareem. But I didn't think of it like that. So when he said that, I was like, it makes sense. Yeah, Trump wouldn't be worried about him if he wasn't a threat. And that's why, they took aim at Kaepernick, and they take aim at LeBron and all those different things. So that should just tell you, what I mean, right there.
Right. So with all the issues that were happening around police brutality, and Kaepernick taking a knee, and then LeBron coming out and talk, and then Fox host Laura Ingraham comes out and says, "Shut up and dribble."
Right.
How did that affect you? I mean, what was that initial thought? I mean, you're sitting there with Kareem. Kareem is giving you that old school game,
right.
A guy that's actually been through it for years and years and years and stood up and put his career on the line for it. So how did that affect you to hear that and hear the pushback from everybody about that?
Well, I just referred to what some of the the legends, the activist legends, told me. I referred to what Bill Russell told me when I interviewed him, and he talked about how they loved him in Boston at first. He was winning championships. All these things was happening. It was they were rolling, and then he started talking about racism and segregation. And then they went down to that game in Kentucky where they wouldn't let them in the hotel. And he said, "No, we're not playing." He said, everybody changed on him then. Everybody turned on him. And he was like, wow, these same people that cheered for me, now that I'm speaking about something, that you don't agree with, now you despise me. And to the point where, they broke into his house. They broke into Bill Russell's house and just kind of wrecked it. And just, all this terrible things. These are Boston fans. So it didn't surprise me when Laura Ingraham said that, because that's how people feel. But the caveat is it's not just the right that does that. It's just not, the conservatives, Republicans that do that. The left do that very well as much too. When you disagree with someone, like I said, anybody can applaud an athlete when they agree with them. They applaud them. This athlete is, they invite them to speak at different places. You see how the right puts their arm around Herschel Walker. They're not telling him to shut up and stick to sports. They love him. Why? Because he's saying something that they agree with. But when somebody says something that they disagree with, then they should just shut up and stay in their lane. They're not intelligent. They don't know what they're talking about. And that's what happens on the right and the left. So my contention, and I argue with a lot of people from the left with this standpoint, because I see it happening when athletes speak out about something that the left disagrees with. I was like, well, wait a minute now. We can't act like the right does. We can't act like Laura Ingraham just because you disagree with them. Then they don't have the right to speak. They still have the right to speak. Now you have the right to disagree with them. You know what I mean? And present your side, and they present their side, but you can't tell them that they don't deserve to speak. Then you're acting like Laura Ingraham.
Preach on it. See, that's the great thing about what you do. You call it like you see it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? From either side, whatever side is wrong, wrong is wrong and right is right. So
definitely.
Pun intended or whatever. But talk about your book, your new book about police brutality and white supremacy, because I think there is a lot of misinterpretation from people out there. I'll post your book. There's a lot of misinterpretations about what goes on, and it was probably see the title of your book, and a lot of people probably might get scared of what's in it.
No question.
So tell us about what you about your book and what you put in it.
So I take a deep dive first into the history of police and the history of white supremacy and how it's interwoven into the fabric of American society from the beginning. And we go from there, and we've examined different things that have happened. and I get the voices of a lot of different people. It's not just me talking, but I want to get the voice of different people, different perspectives, different opinions, different walks of life. And we're talking about different topics. So I break each chapter up into a different topic. We talk about, January 6th and what happened there and why it happened. And I spoke with, Jake Tapper and Jamel Hill and Mahmoud Abdul Aruf in that chapter. Three very different people, very different perspectives, and they're talking about this topic. Jake Tapper is talking about how the media has a role to play in what happened in January 6th and how they push certain narratives that they knew were not true, or whether it's election being stolen, or gave the platform to people to spread hate, whether they're white nationalists or white supremacists, and they allowed their positions to go unchallenged. And I thought that was great, because you don't really hear reporters, especially white reporters, say that very often. You know what I mean? I don't agree with everything that Jake Tapper has ever said, and I don't have to agree with everything that he said, but on this topic, I definitely agree with him. Jamel Hill talked about how, it was interesting, because remember ESPN and what happened with her when she called Donald Trump a white supremacist, and we revisited. I was like, has ESPN ever apologized to you? Because he kind of, after all this happened, he kind of, proved your point. And so we're talking about that and how Donald Trump was able to use basically hatred and racism and white supremacy to catapult himself into office, because he didn't have any other qualifications. He never held a public office before. He wasn't in politics. He never held anything like that. He just had that and how it actually worked. So, so we broke down a lot of different things in each chapter. I have a chapter called, allies and the importance of allies. And I only interviewed white people in that chapter. And I wanted to talk to them about what specifically being an ally means to them and how they can be allies. So I talked to the WNBA player Sue Bird, and she, spoke a lot about, what role she plays. She spoke a lot about white privilege and that term white privilege and how it offends many white people before they can even understand what it means. And this is all her talking. She's like, a lot of white people will say, well, I didn't come from money. And she was like, it has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with certain things don't happen to you because you're white. And as she's talking about, she's like, because we've been on different shows before, and she said, the story that I've told about what I have to go through, what I have to teach my children, the talk that all Black people know that they have to give their kids of what to do when you're stopped by the police, that you can't make any sudden moves. You have to keep your hand on the steering wheel. But they give you a command like, go get your wallet. You have to go slowly. You can't just hurry up and go get your wallet, because then they get all jumpy. You have to say, okay, I'm going to reach in my back pocket and get my ID that you just asked for. Is that okay? And those are certain things that white people don't have to teach their kids. That's not a concern. That's not a fear that they all have. So so it's breaking down different aspects of the two Americas that are here right now. So I'm definitely thankful for all the different people that I was able to interview. Fred Hampton Jr. wrote the foreword, and it was just an amazing project.
That's phenomenal. And so when you talk about, communication and the altering of what the actual meaning of something is, you have conversations with different activists and other people on Twitter and Instagram, and you go back and forth. And a lot of times you'll see some pushback of people, yelling at you before they even know what they're talking about.
Right.
When you talk about it, you can't defend your side if you just come out here just yelling at me, but not knowing with your book. You communicate with police officers, you communicate with allies and other people. So you had the different perspectives. So what is that about communication, especially here in this country where you have the media, two different sides that want to push their narratives, but to have a communication, okay, here we can have differences, but this is what we need to talk about, and we can find our common ground.
No question. I interviewed the former VP of the police union, Joe Ested, and we talked about a lot of different things. Some things we agreed with, some things we disagreed with. We had a whole chapter with Mark Lamont Hill, and they're talking about defund the police and what it actually means and what has been changed to mean. And I did a whole lot of different. It's interesting. I did a whole lot of different programs with different police departments. I remember one in particular, Philando Castile's mother did a program with the police department in Virginia, and I was a part of it. And they talked about, and they said, we wear too many hats. We are being asked to do certain things that we aren't trained to do. We're not trained to handle children. And I was like, so then you should, and I was like, so you shouldn't really be in schools, right? Whether they're resource officers or whatever they call you, because you're not trained to handle if a teenage girl, has a little attitude or rolls her eyes at you, you don't have to have the force that you're going to have with a, person that it's not the same thing. And they're like, no, we're not trained for that. And I was like, so, are you trained if somebody has a mental health issue and you're called of how to calm them down and be able to subdue them without using force? They're not trained that way. So I was like, so why should you be the people in charge or getting the funding for doing something that you're not trained for? And they'll always agree, until it comes to the point of funding, what I mean? Because they don't want to give up the funding. So but now the Officer Joe Ested and Officer Sonia Pruitt, all the different officers I talked to, they'll tell you funding is adjusted every single year. So whether you call it defunding or restructuring funding or reallocating funds or whatever it is, it literally happens every fiscal year. So people took the term defund the police and weaponized it to mean something completely like defund doesn't mean abolish. Those are two different words. Right. They're not synonyms. You know what I mean? So it's just amazing how that happens. But I will say Republicans are very good at changing a narrative and controlling the message, because then you see Democrats kind of succumbing to the new created version of the message that Republicans created, even though that's not what it really means. You know what I mean? So then you get a President Biden at the State of the Union saying, no, we don't need to defund the police. We need to fund them. I'm like, Biden, that's not what it means. You know what I'm saying? So There's a lot of frustration with that as well.
So yeah, that's funny you talk about that. The narratives change, and there's so much noise out here. And so today, because there's so many different people with platforms to talk about different things, and I try to keep my kids away from some of that and give them, the direct information and have them look stuff up themselves by reliable sources. Now, you had the fatherhood movement, right? So you talk about your other book and what you tell to your kids. How has that affected you, and what kind of conversations do you have with your kids about all the stuff that's going on right now?
So the fatherhood movement was great. I started writing that while I was still playing, and I wanted to get a lot of different perspectives of Black men from all walks of life, because I saw how Black men were being depicted as not taking an active role in their children's lives. And I was like, well, it's not always like that. Y'all protect y'all, you know what I mean? Showing it like it's
talking about the narratives.
Yeah.
Right?
But then also there's another, and you'll see a recurring theme with me, going against narratives. But I remember it so well. I was actually with the Hawks, and I was speaking at this big thing and panel put on by Spike Lee at Morehouse, and all Black men, all in college, all doing great. And it's crazy that people who are on there on the panel, you had Stephen A. Smith sitting right next to me, Alonzo Mourning, Jason Whitlock, Vivian Stringer, Jim Brown. It was an amazing panel. But we had a little bit of disagreements during the panel. So one of the things that Jim Brown was saying was that, if you don't have a father in your life, you're going to end up, in jail or, a dropout or something like that. And I was like, well, I kind of always take offense to that, because I grew up from divorced parents. I was in a single parent household. Now, I knew my father, saw my father visitations, but it was like once or twice a month, you know what I mean? But he wasn't physically in the home. So technically I came from a broken home, so I remember always hearing all of the negative statistics of people saying, well, if you come from a broken home, you're probably going to end up, in a gang, in jail, pregnant if you're a woman, drop out, so something like that, something terrible. And I was like, but it don't have to be like that. Y'all understand that, right? Y'all giving statistics and everything like that, but you're presenting it as if it's a foregone conclusion. And so me and Jim Brown started going back and forth. Now, first of all, it's Jim Brown don't really like people disagreeing with him. You know what I'm saying?
And the fact that you're going against Jim Brown. I mean,
I'm saying,
imagine that a young kid, Etan Thomas, say, I'm going to be arguing with Jim Brown on the panel.
But that wasn't the plan. I was just, at first, I was just like, well, it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like you can do, he was like, nah, y'all young people don't know what you're talking about. You know, because he's Jim Brown. You know what I mean? He has a certain presentation. But I couldn't let it go. So other people are looking at me like, you know, why are you still arguing with him? I was like, I can't let it go because it was like stinging me to see all these young black men hearing someone say that who everyone looks up to because it's Jim Brown, saying that if they don't have, you know, came from a broken home, they're probably not going to make it. And so that kind of catapulted me to write this book to show, okay, I'm gonna show you all these black men who did have come up from broken homes and they did make the right choices and the right decisions. And they learned how to be able to do this. And so that's when I became part of the Obama's fatherhood initiative. Became part of My Brother's Keepers, was doing different things all across the country about fatherhood. And that was really a push for especially young black men to understand that life isn't over if you come up from a broken home. You know what I mean? It's not over. It's not like, and that's the way when you push statistics like that on someone, that's how it makes them think. You know what I mean? And I was just so against all of that. And it's all respect to Jim Brown. He's somebody else that I studied growing up. I just happen to disagree with him on this topic. But that's what started my fatherhood book and the fatherhood movement.
Well, I think that was important to discuss because it was important to me as a young father to be in my kid's life, to change that narrative, to have a different conversation. Even though my first wife and I didn't work out, but I was with my kid all the time. I was a big part of her life and my kids now. So, you know, I think it's good that us as black men are taking offense to it, though. You know, that you know, we're not in the households that because, you know, there may be some issues going on that we're not going to be a part of the kid's life. So I definitely appreciate you talking about that. Definitely. So on the other end, you know, because of what's happening with some of this, you know, the shootings, the issues that's going on, as a father, how is that affecting you, and what kind of conversations are you having with your kids now about, you know, what's going on in the world?
So I write about my kids a lot in my books because a lot of the things I'm talking about conversations that I'm having with them, and it just this morning I'm taking my son to school. You know, today is actually the anniversary of George Floyd being murdered. And, you know, my son, you know, he looks at my social media and he you know, learns a lot from watching what I post and what I'm saying. And he was like, wow, it's been 2 years. So I was like, yeah, you know, so we had a whole conversation about that and going back to the details of it. And yeah, you know, they originally stopped him because they thought he had a counterfeit $20 bill, which didn't even turn out to be counterfeit anything. And then it escalated. And then we talked about how the system is set up and, you know, qualified immunity and how police officers, why it's so difficult to usually prosecute police officers or hold them accountable because all they usually have to say is, I was in fear for my life. And that covers everything. And, you know, we talked about, you know, a lot of the work that he's seen me doing. And I've taken my kids to a lot of different events with me, and they've been just a part of everything. So they've been exposed to everything at a young age, and just be able to see and hear having discussions and hear panels and hear people disagreeing and things of that nature. So he asked me, you know, well, how is it that, you know, you can interview these family members? Because I just finished writing Emerald Garner, who is Eric Garner's daughter's book for her. So I just put the finishing bow, you know, touches on everything. And he was like, how do you do that? Like, that seems like it's so heavy, like it, you know, and I was like, it is. I'm not going to say it's not. But when you see the way that they are all of the family members are still pushing for justice, not only for their lost loved one, but so laws can be changed that what happened to their loved one doesn't keep happening. And you just, I mean, I do a lot of work with Botham Jean's sister, you know, Alyssa Charles Finley, and she's trying to push for different laws to be changed and all these different things. Tatiana Jefferson's sisters and, you know, Terrence Crutcher's sister. And, you know, I can keep going on and on. And it's an uphill battle sometimes when you see things happen and you see things not getting better. You know what I mean? Or you see little progress. Like, you know, I mean, Emerald Garner, she got the Eric Garner law, the no chokehold, in New York. And that's a big, it was a big thing because now no police officer can kill anyone else the way that they killed her father. But in the bigger scheme of everything, it's like, so now they can't choke anybody to death, and they're still fighting against that because they want to have the right to be able to choke somebody. And it's like, it's hard. So then even going back to what we're seeing now today with these mass shootings, and you're like, okay, all of these mass shootings have happened with the AR-15. Why is it so easy for somebody to purchase legally an AR-15? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would you need and I'm not somebody who is anti-guns and anti-everything. The Second Amendment, everything like that. But what do you need an AR-15 for unless you're in an actual, war zone in a foreign country or something like that? Why would anybody need an AR-15? And it's just, questions. So we have all those questions. I have all those discussions with my kids, and it
seems so simple about it. It seems so simple. I mean, but you talk about you had the lynching laws that was still on the books. I mean, all these laws that should have changed years ago. Yeah. And it doesn't make sense why they haven't changed, like you just said. And when we have this conversation with our kids, my son told me the other day, he's like, it feels like we're under attack. Yeah. And if he's a young man and he's feeling like that, how do we convince them or tell the next generation that we're doing something, that there's going to be change, that they should have hope about what we can do to make a difference?
Well, we have the conversation a lot because a lot of the young people are being frustrated with the political process, and rightfully so. I'm not saying you have no reason to be frustrated, but really the importance of local elections and teaching young people how important it is that the people locally who are going to be in charge of who is, your police commissioner in your specific city, or who's going to be in charge of education in your specific city. You know what I mean? And in charge of that it really does, because some things, are state to state. Police departments are ran completely different. So the police department in Tulsa is ran completely different than the one in LA, the different one in New York, different one in so they're ran differently. So you do have control and be able to, push for change, especially at the local level. And then just really showing them the power of their voice and their collective voice. I've seen, since Kaepernick took a knee, I've seen all these different athletes all across the country, white and black, being inspired to be able to stand up for whatever it is that their cause is, whatever it is that they're passionate about, and being able to collectively use their voice. I mean, I think it's amazing to really see young people finding their voice at a young age, and I would encourage young people, if there's something you don't agree with, figure out ways to speak out about it, figure out ways to organize, figure out ways to be able to let your voices be heard, start your own blogs, write for different publications, start being able to, speak and use your social media. And social media really does change a lot because, again, we didn't have social media growing up. I ain't had no They have the power.
I was kind of thanking for some of that.
Oh my gosh, they got the power to do so much, but they have to use that power for good.
Yeah, we're talking about using your power for good. What's next for Etan Thomas?
Well, I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing. I have, I write for a few publications. I write for basketballnews.com and The Guardian, and they're different kind of writings. I'm going to keep on writing. I have like 3 different book ideas in my head. A lot of running around with my kids because, you have kids that play sports. They're involved in everything. So, it's an honor to be able to be in their lives and, teaching them and have these conversations with them, both me and my wife together, sometimes me apart, sometimes her apart, because different conversations are different from a father to a daughter and a father to a son, and then from a mother to a daughter. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's different connections, different levels of conversations. And, just going through that whole process, I'm blessed. So when you're blessed, you have to figure out ways to be a blessing to someone else. And I think that anybody can speak out for themselves, but being able to fight for somebody else. And that's why I keep on, fighting for victims, family members of victims of police brutality, and pushing their agendas along and trying to change laws with them and do different things like that. So, there's a lot on the horizon for me, but overall, I'm blessed.
Wonderful, wonderful, and it's an honor to have you on the show and to be in the presence of someone else that has a similar thought process about how we affect change and how we move us forward as a people and as a country. So tell everybody where they can find more information about you and where they can support you and get your books and everything else and stay along with the movement.
Great. So my website is etonthomas.com. It's just my name. On Twitter, I'm at Etan Thomas 36. Same on Instagram. And I'm gonna keep on writing, keep on speaking, and you'll hear a lot from me, going forward. I'm not gonna shut up and do anything. I'm gonna keep on using my voice.
Love it. So any last words for the people before we get out of here?
Yes, just keep the people and family members in Buffalo in your prayers. Family members in Texas at the mass shooting in your prayers. Family members of George Floyd. Now they're reliving everything that happened as the anniversary is today. Just keep everybody in your prayers and figure out what you can do to make a change and to lend your voice and your, whether it's resources or do whatever that you can do to push for things to get better. That's what I would leave you with.
Brother, I appreciate you. It was an honor. It was a great show. I think you inspired and had a great conversation with some people today. And what you're doing is much appreciated. I know sometimes we don't all get told that, but what you're doing is appreciated, and your change, the things that you're doing is making a change in this world, and man, a change for the better. So happy early Father's Day to you. And
you too.
Yeah, and can continue to do your work, man. In any way that we can support you, I'm here. So I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Know Better, Do Better. Go follow Etan Thomas. Get the book. Stay with the movement because we got to make a change. We'll see y'all later on the other side. Appreciate it. Take care.